a survivor of the Marikana massacre who's living with a bullet in his head says it's a shame that calls for a monument to be built in remembrance have gone unheard. Today marks 12 years since police shot and killed 34 protesting mine workers in August 2012. At the time, the Lonmin workers were demanding better pay. So far, the state has settled about 71 million rand to some of the families. Malungelo Boy reports.
This is probably one of the most talked about sites in modern-day South Africa. It looks calm here and deserted, but it's not always been this way. It was here in 2012, on the 16th of August, when police shot and killed 34 Lonmin mine workers who were on strike demanding better pay. Nearly 80 others were injured in the tragedy that's been described as one of the worst in democratic South Africa. Mathunjwa says he has made peace that he will live with a bullet in his head for the rest of his life. Even 12 years after the incident, Mathunjwa is still puzzled how he survived the massacre. While Mathunjwa says he holds no grudge against those who left him almost paralyzed, he admits he's disappointed that nothing has been done to memorialize the incident. What One expert says calls for a monument at the site of the Marikana massacre are justified.
So the matter of memorializing is a matter of holding up the spirit, of the people. And these things are so powerful. That's why now the Cecil John Rhodes statue had to come under fire, from the students because of the potency of what it exactly held. It's just unfortunate that with us, in our country, we have no sense of our own, history and appreciation.
Ntuli believes a monument here would also signify reconciliation and offer a lesson that something like this should never happen again. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Malungelo Boy in Marikana.
Right, so let's now reflect on the day, and for that we're joined by AMCU President Mr. Joseph Mathunjwa. Mr. Mathunjwa, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So here we are, 12 years later after the shooting of 34 miners at Marikana, and I think the first place to start would be what comes top of mind when you think about where we are now 12 years later. And of course there's the question around whether or not justice has been seen. 71 million rand paid to some families, but is this a case that is closed in your view?
Good morning to you and to your viewers. Thank you. Yes, this was the day that our fake democracy state killed its own people who put them in power. To date, we haven't seen any politician who was involved. We haven't seen any senior police hierarchy that were involved conducting this massacre behind bars. So justice hasn't been served. So the justice has been denied for the victims of Lonmin Sibanye massacre to date.
Yeah. In the package that we just played there, the calls have been made also for a monument. And I wonder which is more important, the calls for justice that you are talking about and what that would look like in your view versus the calls for the massacre, the day to be, to have a monument in it.
I mean, monument is one thing, but the justice, I think, is far most important. because monument, yes, you can have a monument, but at the end of the day, what to have a monument without having justice being served? So, I mean, I think we as South African, we are quick to forget, because, I mean, the massacre of or the killing of these workers, it was a wake-up call to all of us as South Africans that is not yet uhuru. And we still see this thing continued. Even in Phoenix massacre, we've seen it. Even the state president visited Phoenix massacre site, and then he gave, what's name, a recommendation that these people, they were protecting their interests, their businesses in the expense of the black people. So therefore, I mean, South Africa is not yet uhuru. This is a fake democracy. We are led by the fake revolutionaries. And this is what 16 of August 2012 exposed, of which we South African, we couldn't catch up with that.
You know, you talk about the president visiting Phoenix after the 2021 riots and the shootings that happened there. And I think it's hard to speak about Marikana without mentioning some of the calls that have been made where the president is concerned. I mean, it was, I think, in 2021 when the economic freedom fighters came out quite emphatic, and it seemed like they were quite resolute, saying the NPA has 30, what was it? I think they gave him 30 days, I think, to prosecute the president for Marikana, or the party itself would take the NPA to the High Court. That was all the way in 2021. Of course, there's a question around where that ended up, but you know, let's talk a little bit about how law enforcement, how we should be engaging with this discussion around Marikana and the president.
I mean, you know, in South Africa, our 1994 was another 1652 of arrival of Jan van Riebeeck. We are still colonized in this country. The only thing, they changed the color of the cards, which now those who perpetuate colonization and the oppression of the black child are our fellow black people. So, I mean, you cannot come to a national station and tell the whole world or the nation that you will come and seek for apology from the victims of Marikana, but even today you haven't. But where there was, there was these riots in Phoenix, you went to the Indians community and comfort them and give them a hug to say, yes, they've done a very good job to protect, their interest or their businesses in the expense of the black people who were massacred in Phoenix without even provoking any person. So now you could see clearly that this massacre of Lonmin, which is by Stillwater massacre currently, it was well thought, it was not a mistake, it was not an incident, it was a planned to protect the foreign direct investors in the expense of your own people.
Just to get clarity here, Mr. Mathunjwa, are you saying that you believe that the president owes Marikana residents and even widows an apology? I mean, the Farlam Commission was of the view, though, in its report, and I'm going to read from it, it said it cannot be said that Mr. Ramaphosa was the cause of the massacre.
That's why we call the commission of omission. I mean, you cannot write an email that people, they must take a concomitant action. And based on that email, 34 mine workers were murdered, were massacred. And then you said you shouldn't extend any apology to that effect. So, I mean, show me any of the recommendation of Farlam Commission of Omission has been implemented.
One of the things that came out of the report as well was that the decision to, I suppose, disarm the mine workers in the run-up to this fateful day that saw 34 mine workers killed would have come from police directives, and there was, of course, a questioning around, you know, inquiries into the fitness to hold office of Police Commissioner Ria Piecha at the time and Northwest Police Commissioner Zukiswa Mbobo. But then, of course, there was the question around whether or not there was a need for the miners to be disarmed. And I want to highlight this, right? The report, the Farlam Commission, finding that at scene 2, there were no cartridges found that had been fired by the miners. So let's talk a little bit about the violence in the run-up to that day. right? And AMCU's understanding of if there was a need to disarm mine workers and protesters.
Remember, I mean, you are referring to around Korea, around the rail line. That is where we are referring to. There was a good engagement between the workers and the police, which was led by one of the senior commissioner, a gentleman called by, I just forget, I mean, this gentleman. But nevertheless, there was an agreement. There was no need for disarmament because, I mean, they agreed that please escort us as we travel back to Kopi. And what they did, the police themselves threw the stun grenade amongst the workers. And then there was a pandemonium. And then it's where then everything broke loose. When the workers were running, crossing the river, they shot them at the back of their heads. So, I mean, this thing, you could see clearly that the government was supporting a white monopoly capital in the expense of the workers. And this was a labor relation matter. This was not a criminal, as other trade unions were calling workers criminals.
Yeah, you know, you talk about it being a labor relations matter, and I wonder just how much, if any, accountability AMCU itself takes in the tensions that built up to the lives that were lost in 2012 in Marikana. I mean, certainly the strained, and that's, I think, an understatement of a word, a relationship between AMCU and NUM in the run-up to that day is something to be talked about, and that relationship still taking center stage. I mean, just last year we were talking about 500 NUM members and the allegations that they were being held hostage by AMCU at Gold One Mine, for instance. So let's talk about the lessons that Labour, AMCU, has learned from Marikana, and if there's any accountability taken by you know, the unions and the tensions between the two.
Let's start by saying what media has learned from its biasness in reporting and feeding the nation ill information. What have you learned yourself as you still continue even this morning? There was no tension between AMCU and NUM. AMCU was not a recognized trade union at Marikana, at Lonmin by then. AMCU was called by the management of Lonmin to come and assist. I don't know where do you come cooking up this narrative that there was a tension between AMCU and what's name? I mean, and NUM. And this narrative you busy purporting year in, year out. I've been explaining this even in the Farlam Commission for the whole month, repeating one and the same thing. But that does not come closer to your understanding on these matters.
Okay, I think you've answered my question. I'm going to let you close it off. What we take from what we've learned from the past 12 years and really what needs to be done to improve the lives of Marikana residents in 2024.
Those who kill the workers, those who sit with the white monopoly capital, those who had an interest in Lonmin. Our state president had an interest in Lonmin, the sitting state president Ramaphosa. What have you done as media? Have you ever went this morning and give him a call to say, how does he feel in 12 years where 34 mine workers were mowed down because of his concomitant action email? Have you done that?
We're speaking to all relevant stakeholders.
No, it's
in the
relevant.
matter.
The president is very relevant. It's a main actor in this massacre. Have you spoken to him?
Okay, well, we'll follow up with all the relevant stakeholders, Mr. Mathunjwa. Let me ask you this before.
Phone him. You've got his number. Phone
yes,
him.
Yes, Mr. Mathunjwa.
As you were able to call me. Call him. He's
okay,
a main
but allow me
matter.
also to ask questions so that you can answer them, Mr. Mathunjwa. Otherwise, it's not an interview. We're shouting at each other. Before we wrap up, please, what are the activities of AMCU today? What are the activities of AMCU today to commemorate the lives of 34 mine workers?
In organizing this massacre? No, we cannot allow you. I mean, this is a gutter journalism.
I'm trying to do that by asking you questions as Labour and as a Labour union that has, you know, relevant interests in what took place in Marikana. And my final question to you is, what are the activities that you are holding to commemorate the event? And I can assure you that as the media, we speak to all the relevant stakeholders about what happened in Marikana as we commemorate the day.
Have you interviewed, has he came to a Zoom meeting like you call me? We give you access, we answer your question year in, year out. We're asking one and the same question, but you don't understand our answers to that effect. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's so bad that this couldn't have happened in a democratic state where the democratic government, this is worse than a Sharpeville massacre, because in Sharpeville, that was a nationalist party and apartheid government. This was our government that we put in power, killing its own people, protecting the resources that are foreign owned.
Yeah.
18 years in democracy, those workers were still earning 3,000, 4,000, working underground under harsh conditions, 40 degrees Celsius, living in the shacks, in the squalor. And this government in 18 years haven't changed anything. Now we are in 30 years in this fake democracy led by the fake revolutionaries.
Okay, Mr. Mathunjwa, I'm going to leave it there. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So Joseph Mathunjwa, there's the president of AMCU, speaking to us about 12 years since the Marikana massacre in 2012. Let us know your thoughts on that discussion at Newzroom 405.